and welcome to the Courage Made Simple podcast. I'm Margareta Kull, a mother of 3 courageous young women and a courageous leader trainer. For the past 20 years, I've helped hundreds of leaders from over 50 countries, from senior executives to aspiring changemakers, find the courage to face challenges at work and at home. I know firsthand that leading isn't just about work. Whether it's guiding a team at work, setting boundaries at home, showing up for the people who matter most, or navigating other tough decisions, courage is essential in every part of life. It's how we become the people we want to be. This podcast is a space to explore the messy questions of being a leader at work and at home. Through insights, tools, and personal stories, we'll help you find your courage. If you're ready to move from feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or frustrated to becoming a more confident, capable, and courageous leader, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. What's a challenge or question you'd like me to explore in this podcast? Send me a DM on LinkedIn or Instagram at Margareta Kull. I'd love to hear your thoughts and answer your questions in future episodes. Today's episode is about courage, the kind it takes to leave a system that once defined your life, and what leaders can learn from that. My guest today is Jackie Johnson, Executive Director of ICSA, International Cultic Studies Association. Jackie helps people recovering from cults and high-control groups, and she also has her very own story of courage. Jackie, first of all, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Margareta.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I am too. And if it's anything like what we've done leading up to this, it's going to be really exciting for me. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we go into your story, how would you like to describe yourself professionally and personally today?
Professionally, I'm a doctoral level social worker, educated here in the States, in the United States. My career has gone from working in mental health, in juvenile justice, in private practice as a therapist. I've had government roles in the state of New York for most of my career. And now I focus on supporting people with recovery from cultic experiences. My private practice is on hold because another point about me professionally is in 2022, I accepted the position of executive director for the International Cultic Studies Association. So I don't have that much time for a private practice anymore, but I do meet with people for consultations around that. Personally, I'm a mom. I'm a stepmom. I have my own story of cultic experience and cultic recovery. And I really love working in executive level positions. I like the field of organizational change. So when I come into a position, even if it may be in human services or mental health system, I really love the administrative part of organizational change, climate and culture, which is what my study for my doctorate was. And so I enjoy leadership positions, and I appreciate being able to talk with you ladies about that today.
Yes, this is so fascinating for us because I'm talking about myself and our listeners as well. I think to both hear your personal story, how you changed your life with the help of courage, and then also combine all of that experience with being a leader and also a leader in an organization. Because I bet what you see in organizations are things that other people might see, may not see, and might see way too late.
Mm.
And it wouldn't, I don't want to get ahead of things, but I can just imagine that do you say in English, tentacles are out there feeling things much earlier
Yes.
than,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing about that.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your story, your personal story, and so that we understand what you've been through.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I was born in the 60s, and there was, I guess, typical turmoil, culturally in the States at that time, as there always is in countries. But anyway, I say that to say that, my parents were recruited in the 70s when I was 10 into Jehovah's Witnesses. So before that, up until I was 10 years old, I had a pretty normal life. I had two huge Italian families, on my dad's side, on my mom's side, lots of cousins, aunts and uncles, the oldest of four children in my family. And when I was 10, in the 70s, my parents were recruited into Jehovah's Witnesses, like I said. Whatever it was about the religion, I'll call it a religion for the sake of listeners, but it operates like a quote cult. Whatever it was about that just resonated with my parents, and they latched on quickly and fully. For example, they started studying with Jehovah's Witnesses in January of 1975. By September, in 9 months, they were both baptized as Jehovah's Witnesses, and our life changed drastically just before the holiday season started. And what I mean by that, if anyone is familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses, they know that there is no celebration of holidays, no celebration of birthdays. In typical cult-like fashion, there's an us versus them mentality. So if someone is not a Jehovah's Witness, that's really the cutoff. If someone is not a Jehovah's Witness, they're considered bad association, and you are to not socialize with them. And the only reason that you would really get together with them is if you are proselytizing to them or trying to recruit them to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses, get them agree to a Bible study with you. But what that translated into for us, especially as kids, was that our relationships with our relatives were cut off.
Oh, of course.
So, and for me, I think it was probably the hardest out of all four kids because I was already 10. I had really good relationships with a lot of my relatives because I was the first born of the next generation. I got a lot of attention and I was favored, I think, for that. But regardless, it meant a lot when I lost those relationships. It's not like I barely knew them because I was too young. I was already 10. And so it was really traumatic not seeing any of them or going to family dinners or reunions or the holidays, or it was just like they were plucked out of our life. And that was supplanted by congregation life. So what became more prominent in our lives were all of these strangers from the congregations that we were in, and they were over. My parents are very warm, hospitable people, and so we always had company in our house. But to us kids, they were strangers. We got to know them eventually, but, they were not our family. So that was kind of the early years, and what that was like as a school-age child was that all of a sudden, you can't have friends in school.
You stayed in the
So
same school?
Yes. Yeah. So all of a sudden you can't have friends, and that's awkward as a kid, because in social development as a human, you're naturally, attracted to your peers and finding common things and making friendships. Those things happen organically. It's not like it's something that you can really control. Humans are attracted to each other and you start making relationships. It just happens organically. But what you have to learn as a young child in a group like that is to put a stop to that process, because now, you've already learned and been conditioned to, number one, feel guilty that you're doing something wrong by making a friend who's not a Jehovah's Witness. And so you're trying, even at a young age, to, as you're becoming friendly with this person, and they don't know anything, they don't know what's going on here. They just think they want to be your friend,
Yeah.
and it's normal for them. But in your own mind, without their knowledge, you're trying to find a way as a young child, to keep them at arm's length and to be kind of like sociable at school so that you're not weird or isolated, but not get too close because then what happens is, oh, do you want to come over my house? Do you want to come over for a sleepover? Or why are you not inviting me over? Or do you want to go to the mall today? Or you can't accept any of those invitations and you can't reciprocate by giving any invitations. So it was a really difficult dance of, especially being kind of like a friendly person and enjoying
Mm,
relationships,
mm.
to, as a child, purposefully like hold your peers at arm's length and not get too close. And it also translated into, there was no after school activities, no sports, no anything that school had, dances, homecoming, because all of that is considered bad association because none of them are Jehovah's Witnesses. And then finally, of course, around the holidays, it's always awkward because you can't celebrate, but you're there. And so,
Yes.
you're there with the birthday parties, you're there with the Christmas holidays, you're there with the school projects that are holiday related. And as a kid, you have to find a way to explain why you're not participating. I was going to say without getting in trouble with the teacher, so it's like, how, as a child, are you explaining why you're not participating? And the tagline was kind of like, "It's against our religion." And most people would look, at us, me and like, others, like, "What are you talking about? It's against your religion." And as a kid, you have to try to explain this, so it
And
was
did you
awkward.
agree with your parents?
I think at the time as, 10, 11, 12, like preteen, I can only speak for myself. Like we just knew not to question. You just kind of go along and obey. But like personally inside, it was terrible, awkward. There was grieving because you miss the holidays, your birthday comes around and it's ignored, and you miss, for me, it's like I really missed my relatives, my family. So inside, there was a lot of grieving, a lot of confusion, some resentment, but you just have to obey, you just have to move forward and obey, So, and my parents, as loving as they are, I think whether it was their generation or their own capabilities, were really not the kind of parents who were willing to sit down and talk about these difficulties. It's like you just don't question.
No, it was decisions were made, and this is how we live, and
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah, yeah, and it wasn't in a harsh way at all. It's not like they were controlling or, harsh about it. It was just the way it was.
But what actually attracted them, the parents, your parents, to join?
Try to ask them, they give a canned answer at this stage in their life. I mean, they've been Jehovah's Witnesses for over 50 years. They're in their 80s now,
Mm.
that they just, quote, knew it was the true religion,
Oh.
but, they've been conditioned to think that and say that. I
Yes.
personally think that Jehovah's Witness doctrine was very attractive to them in certain ways. Both of them had very little support from their own parents. And although their marriage was good and they're still together and their marriage is still great, I think they felt kind of unsupported and alone. And Jehovah's Witness congregations and the regular rank and file can be very loving and supportive. There's nothing wrong with them. It's like the policies of the organization are the problem.
Do you know, it's interesting that you're mentioning that because when you were telling earlier, I was thinking it's interesting how we can choose inclusion, as we're saying, is so important. It's for our survival, and forget that we then put our dearest ones in a situation of exclusion,
Yes, that's a great way of saying it.
which
And
is
it's
like
basically what happened. Yes.
I heard a therapist say once when someone who had lived with a sick sibling, and the mother had said, "You need to listen to a sick person. You need to prioritize the sick person. You always believe the sick person." And then I remember that a therapist had then said, "Yeah, but what she misses is that she then disbelieves the other sibling."
Yeah.
You tend to focus. You just
Yeah.
focus on one area, and then you forget your blind spots.
Yeah. There were a lot of blind spots. I mean, later on in my story, probably when I was, I don't know, maybe less than 10 years ago, my life had calmed down enough, and I took it upon myself, for a new project to reach out to all the relatives that I had lost. And thankfully, most of them were still alive.
Yeah.
Some were in their 70s and 80s, but they're still
Wow.
alive. And I can't tell you how many of them, and those relationships were repaired and reconnected instantly. That was not a problem. But what I learned was that dynamic that you were just mentioning, about how, okay, so you see this and you want inclusion and this is right for you and you're pursuing this, but you really not seeing how it affects everyone else. So when I reconnected with my relatives, all of them said, there was not one of them that didn't say, why did your dad do this? Like, we all missed him so much. We missed you kids. You missed so much of our family, and we lost a lot of culture, and that's another thing that can happen when people are cult involved, because it's such an insular way of life and isolated that, there's a lot you lose. And, one thing that we lost, not 100%, but I think, to a good extent, was our Italian culture, because we were, isolated from our Italian family and traditions and all of that. But you're right, it's like these decisions, for inclusion affect so many people. My kids see it as, very selfish decision from, my parents, but they certainly didn't mean it to be selfish. They just,
But we do
they
some of
believed
it
and yeah,
without being aware of it.
right. And they wholeheartedly, to this day, I think, because they, with like every cell in their body, think it's the true religion and believe everything. I think really thought that it was the best thing for us.
Yes.
Um, but
But it's also then interesting how you then pick up the real truth, the real need could have been, not saying it is or was, your father's need to meet his father again.
yeah, he's never admitted that, but
No.
it has to play a role. They said They said, well, when we first started studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, we found out, according to Jehovah's Witness belief, that Mary, Jesus' mother, was not ever virgin. And they say, when we found that out, that's it. We knew that, it was the right religion. And I don't know what it was about that one point, but they rest their whole decision on that. And I say, but there's so many other things that they teach that are wrong and harmful. Why do those things not matter to you? So it's a hard conversation. And it's something, that we focus on in the cult recovery world, is about, how to talk to loved ones who are still cult involved. But we can get into that later.
Yes.
But
Interesting. Yes, definitely. This conversation
yeah,
can go on forever, Jackie.
it does. I mean, it's like it never ends. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm so curious. I'm so
Yeah.
curious. So should we move into your life, your everyday life, and the family's everyday life in Jehovah's Witnesses? What was that like? What norms and rules and expectations and so forth was that? And did you stay in the same, where, I don't even know where in the States this was. And were you staying in the same place? And
Yeah. So, I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses is a large international organization, so they're all over the place. I'm sure you know
yeah,
that.
no,
So
we've had them here since I was a child.
yeah, I mean, I was born and raised in the Hudson Valley, New York, which is about hour and a half north of New York City, and that's where my family, still resides. I'm not there any longer, but our whole family is there. Interestingly, life as a Jehovah's Witness in that area is a little more fundamentalist and strict, because it's in that whole area where all of Jehovah's Witnesses headquarters are. So you're surrounded, and in the local congregations, you'll see peppered in, leaders or people who dedicate their whole life full time to their ministry, because you're, amongst all of their compounds and headquarters. And so, things have a tendency to be stronger in those areas. I would say, from my experience, for me growing up there, it was just a life of, it was very joyless. It was very controlled, a lot of rules. It was pretty neglectful, in terms of what kids need for, development. And there's like, I could
Such as?
expound on each one of these. You mean neglect?
Yeah.
Definitely social neglect. I mean, like,
Mm.
I explained you kind of like the experience of school. So there was a lot of social neglect. You're basically, relegated to who in your congregation or neighboring congregations you can socialize with. And if there aren't a lot of kids your age or kids that you click with, I mean, there may be kids your age, and so you end up having very little friends or no friends, or you have to then socialize with people who are older than you or even maybe younger than you. And so your pool of social connections is determined by two things. Are they a Jehovah's Witness or not? And are they available and accessible to you locally? And so it was a pretty lonely life as a
And
kid.
you like them. I don't think you even said that.
That right, and that's what I mean, like, do you click with each
Yeah.
other,
Yeah.
right, and it's funny because my father was always trying to push us kids toward other kids, and we would say, "But, y you know?" But it's like stuff like that doesn't matter anymore. And so sometimes we would get in trouble for not talking to a certain kid in the congregation, but they weren't our friend. So it was just like awkward all the time, all of this artificial pushing and artificial relationships. And the other thing about everyday life for me, I can't even speak for my brothers and sisters. I won't do that. But the congregations have, very strong bodies of elders who, in other words, could meddle a lot. And I experienced that profoundly growing up, where some of the elders in our congregation were constantly coming to our house, counseling me. They thought I was flirting with some of the young guys, and I was like, "There's no way in hell I'm interested in any of these guys because I don't even like the religion. Why would I pursue someone who's in it?" But
Oh, so I misunderstood you. So you were not, they weren't there to correct you from flirting with someone. They wanted to inspire you to flirt with someone.
no, it was correction. They thought I was, and yeah, it was just awkward, and it's like, why am I being blamed? I'm like, I'm just talking to somebody. But the point of that for me is, my parents allowed, these men to, talk to me in that way. And it's like, what parent would really abdicate their own role in parenting and let another stranger kind of come in
I
and correct their child? I was like 15-year-old girl, 15, 16.
wow.
So, there was a lot of weird stuff like that, like interfering and meddling and rules of what you can and can't do, scrutiny of either too much makeup or this dress or low neckline, like all of that kind of fundamentalist, mentality.
Did you manage to see the separate the two worlds? That this is
Oh,
one way of looking at it, and where do I want to be? Did
oh yeah.
yeah.
I mean, from day one, it's been so obvious you can't not think that. I mean, like all of a sudden you're not celebrating holidays. And even if
Yes.
you're born into the religion, like my youngest brother was born in, by going to school, I mean, you learn all about the holidays. You're doing,
Yes.
part of your schoolwork is do this Christmas project or this or that. And you just know.
My interpretation of what you're saying is that people told you to this is what you're going to say. If you see A, you tell them B. But when you then said what you'd been told to say, did you doubt it in your own mind, or had you started to go along with it?
No, for me personally, I never connected with the
No.
religion.
Okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
and I think I don't really know all the reasons, but I could speculate that one, I was old enough by the time that my parents converted that it just didn't connect with me. I didn't agree with a lot that was going on. It was too awkward. It felt contrived and artificial. It just felt like something that my parents wanted to do and that we had to go along. And I tried hard, mind you. I tried hard
Yes.
throughout the years to, quote, make it your own, which is another phrase they use. And I just couldn't. I never, I mean, like, honestly, to this day and my whole life, I could never really wrap my head around the notion of God even. It's just, I just can't, it doesn't compute in my brain. No, I never owned it, and so it was hard kind of living that. It was a very contrived life, and it wasn't until after I left, which I was 52 years old when I finally left for good. that I realized that my whole life I had been waiting for the day that I could leave. And I just didn't realize that until after I actually did leave. So it was a funny sensation. I think I talked about most of my like younger life, what that
Yeah.
was like up into my
And
teens.
suddenly you
But then
became
it's
52.
right. And so it's like it's the young adult age, which is like you're getting into the marriage and do you go to, what high school, college that sets you up for your level of success as an adult, and then the ramifications of that life on the rest of your adult life, you know. Um so like all of those rules and restrictions of young life, lead to struggles as an adult. You can only marry within the faith. So you and with stuff like that, same thing with like with the friends, when you have restrictions around who you can be friends with or who you can marry, two things happen, probably more, but two things. One is you don't ever get to know yourself and your own value system and what you need out of friends or what you need out of a partner, because the only criteria is, are they a well-functioning Jehovah's Witness? You don't want a loser Jehovah's Witness. You want someone who's really active in the congregation. And so your pool of who you are allowed to date, marry, this and that, have kids with is so small that you get lost in the process. It's not about you and what you need out of a partner anymore. So by the time you get married, you're just choosing someone on this very silly criteria. And marriages are really difficult unless both people really like disown themselves from their own self and just go through the motions of Jehovah's Witness life with their husband or wife. Um, but that's not what happened to me. I tried to make the best choice I could, with getting married. And I really loved my first husband. He was about my age. He was also from an Italian family. He also didn't like Jehovah's Witnesses. I was like, oh, we're match made in heaven. Like all these counts, But he didn't know himself because he was raised neglectfully as a Jehovah's Witness. I didn't know myself. And it's like two strangers just trying to have a marriage and raise kids, and it just doesn't work. So, that marriage only lasted about, I think 9 years or 7 years. So,
Had children together.
yes, but we had our children, and the nice thing was that neither he nor I wanted to raise the kids as Jehovah's Witnesses. So they're not. So, he's left the organization and is remarried, same, with me, but our kids are not in the organization, neither is our granddaughter. So in that way, I feel like, oh, we did a pretty good job. We're disconnected as a family, but we're all out and we're all happy. And, we get together on the holidays with each other and, we all get along. That's another problem, and you just never really get to know yourself because its value system and the rules of the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses doesn't allow you, all that developmental neglect doesn't allow you to get to know who you are, what you want, what your values are. So you go into adult life kind of empty as a person.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking this word that's stuck in my head is exploration. How exploration is so important for a human being. Even when we
No.
try to face a difficult decision, it's about exploring different options. And if you're then limited and have been taught all your life, you stay within this small box, in there you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
It's really, it really changes your possibilities as a
Well,
human being.
it's sure yeah, I mean, it just limits you completely and you come out of it really empty inside, because you're not allowed that exploration. And as a matter of fact, there's a lot of expectations that you abandon all of that. So, the whole thing about higher education is has always been uh not just frowned upon, but almost like forbidden. And Jehovah's Witnesses will deny that, but I will tell you and your listeners who question that, that they have an elder's manual. So when someone is made an elder, there's a whole book they get with all the rules and everything. And in that book, because I have a copy,
Mm.
um, you know, says to their elders, if your wife or your kids go to college or pursue higher education, you could be removed as an elder. So,
Which means you can still stay in the congregation, but you're not allowed to be an elder.
lose your privileges, and that
Yeah.
comes with a lot of shame. It comes with a lot of judgment because now the whole congregation is like, "Oh, what did he do that he's not an elder anymore?" And a lot of chatter, and
Yes.
it's just a really toxic environment when it comes to shame and public shaming and people wondering like, "Oh my goodness, how did so and so break the rules?" Or and it becomes really judgmental and unhealthy.
Where do you think
So
that's I call it fear. Fear, where do you think that fear of education is coming from? What is that about?
the fear of
Education.
because two things really. One is, typically when people pursue higher education, their critical thinking abilities are developed and honed and strengthened. And now you're going to say, wait a minute, now I'm looking at this organization with a critical mind because I've attained some critical thinking skills, and a lot of their logic fallacies can't work anymore. A lot of their beliefs won't hold up anymore. It's like when you attain critical thinking, all of their scaffolding just falls apart. And so they'll lose the membership and, all of that. But also they kind of condition people to say that um, if you're not pursuing your worship 100%, there's something wrong with you. So there's a lot of shame and guilt there. And so pursuing a career, pursuing education is considered worldly pursuits. That's judged and you're criticized and it's considered wrong. And there's a lot of guilt and shame. And, so it's a cultural thing, within the organization, like, so from a young age, this is what people are learning, so people who come in as an adult either have to latch on like my parents, or kids are just conditioned along the way. I'm just thankful that it didn't take root in my in my brain. It was a long road, but it was like rather go through the long road of life that I've had than to like be a Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So what
Yes.
happens in that? You mentioned you were pushed in at the age of 10, and then you're saying then I managed to leave or I left when I was 52.
Yeah.
So we have
A lot of years in between.
a lot of years there.
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, in before I left, I was actually disassociated, which is their word for excommunicated twice for breaking rules. So you'll break a rule and they find out, and then they pull you in and you sit in front of a committee of three elders and they talk to you about it, ask you questions, investigate your sin, or how you broke the rules. And then they determine whether you're repentant or not, whether you're sorry, whether you're regretful, um, and whether you are worthy. Ultimately, what it means is, do they think you are worthy of remaining in the congregation? And it's just a control mechanism,
Yes, that's
and
not.
so
Do you have?
so
How do you feel about talking about what actually the sin was?
the first time the sin was that I visited a former Jehovah's Witness. He was a Jehovah's Witness and got removed because he got in trouble with the law and was, just in our county jail for a very short time. And I visited him. And that was the first thing, because how you like, oh my goodness, first of all, you're associating with a former Jehovah's Witness who they consider apostate and bad association. So if you are known to talk to or associate with someone who is has been removed as a Jehovah's Witness or who voluntarily left, that's it. You're excommunicated. That's like their number one thing. You cannot associate or talk to a former Jehovah's Witness. And let me just say that that's in their instruction, even by written and in video. It's in written instruction, and they have videos demonstrating even parents with kids. If their kid is removed from the congregation out of discipline, or if their child voluntarily leaves, those parents are to disown that child and not show. There's videos of a parent receiving a phone call from their child who was no longer a Jehovah's Witness. They see that it's their child and they put the phone down, and because that's where the shunning comes in. So I was disfellowshipped because I visited my former friend, my friend who was a former Jehovah's Witness.
Mm.
Um and and then this and then the second time was for what they say fornication, so sex before marriage. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first time I was disassociated, excommunicated, and shunned, like literally shunned, I was 19.
Mhm.
I had to move out of my parents' house and find a place to live. So my who turned out to be my first husband, we were dating. We decided to get a place and live together. And so we were both out of the organization. We were both disfellowshipped. We were living in sin.
Yes.
We were
Yes.
living together. And then we wanted to get married. And so both families said, well, if you want to get married, you have to come back to the congregation. So we did that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the process of getting reinstated into the congregation is very long. It's like almost a year. So you have to go to every church meeting. You have to start a Bible study with an elder again. It's basically like you have to prove yourself for months and months and months. And then they will finally.
Thinking about
Okay.
all of that when
It-
you've had doubt during the first 10 years.
It's funny because my daughter and I were just talking about this,
Mhm.
essentially like, why didn't I ever really leave? Like, or why would I always come back? Or, why did it take so long? And there's a few things to talk about there. One is you can liken it to when an abused person keeps going back to an abusive relationship.
Of course.
It's
Yeah.
like it's that dynamic. Um, the other thing is, from a logistics standpoint, there's nowhere to go. Like you've already been cut off for so long. You have no friends outside of the congregation or the religion. You have no family anymore outside of it. Like, where do you go?
Your whole safety net is
Well,
within the congregation.
there's nowhere to go, and that's what I said to her. Like I had no education. I had a high school diploma. I had no work experience because, and I had no money. I had no support I had no support in the organization either, but that's where my world was. And I had no, so it was like, how do you kind of leave with no resources, no connections, no support? Like literally nowhere to go.
Gosh, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't want to interrupt, but I'm still doing it. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm thinking of how often we talk about people leaving prison and
Yes.
wanting to change their life
Yeah.
desperately for some
Mhm.
time. And then
Yeah.
they have no one on the outside world, outside of prison, who's not
Yeah.
in their network, who's not, within in the criminal world. So suddenly they're
Right.
back in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And for Jehovah's Witnesses and probably other cultic groups, there's always a very, very, very strong element of guilt and shame. I mean, that's basically what allows the organization to condition people to police themselves. And so with being disfellowshipped, especially being young, like it was 19 the first time, it's like, oh, I broke my parents' heart. My parents are so sad. My parents are so disappointed. Or I feel, I never really felt guilt or shame over anything that I did. But you end up feeling like a loser, like you're labeled like a loser, like an underachiever. You are the black sheep in your family. You broke your
But did you
parents' heart.
believe that deep down?
No, no.
Oh, that's good to know.
But when your parents and your other, people are saying, "Oh, your parents are so heartbroken," or "Oh, your parents miss you," or, you're like, "Oh God," so like when we were young and wanted to get married, both families were like, "You can't support your marriage unless you come back." And here we were like, all right, well, what do we do? So we went back and thought, well, we could go back and then just kind of live our own life. But we should have known better because there is no living your own life when you're in the organization, but we were so young. And
Yeah,
so,
you were so young and you just had that perspective. That was all you had. You hadn't been,
yeah, even though it doesn't
hadn't
feel
been
right.
trained to explore another world at all.
Right, right. And so, it's hard. There's a lot of martyrdom in this type of situation too. So and my parents are still this way, they've been conditioned for 50 years. It's like, so when I left the organization, it's not poor me that my whole family is shunning me for leaving because I don't have the autonomy to make my own life. It's poor them that I left. Like I'm doing something to them by leaving. And I've said to them so many times, like, you have the autonomy to change your whole life and leave Catholicism, leave our family to become Jehovah's. Why do I not have the same autonomy to leave and make my own life? So, like, they're the martyr, and that's just how they're taught and conditioned, and so it's hard when
It's honestly
when
all about them all the way, isn't it? What happened as you got older and obviously got closer to leaving? What
yeah,
happened in you? What did you notice? What did you see? Well, what was that journey like?
that marriage ended after 7 years. Unfortunately, the kids were little. They were, I think, 4 and 3, something like that. No, not 4 and 3. They were, I think 6 and 3, whatever. Y and so, at the time of I got disfellowshipped again when we got divorced, because I started dating, and we didn't have a scriptural divorce,
I don't know what that is, of course.
what that means, like, the divorce was, like, born out of, like, adultery.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so we had a legal divorce, but we weren't considered divorced in the eyes of the congregation. But I started dating and then I was disfellowshipped for, fornication because in their eyes I was still married, even though legally I wasn't. And when I started dating, so um
You certainly had some courage then. All the way through, it sounds like,
I
you
was
became a
young.
pious person.
I was only 29, 29, 30 years old. So I was young. I was still wanted to go out and have fun. I still
Yeah.
wanted to, and I say to my kids, like, I was a lot younger than you are now, when all of this was happening, So I was still like in my really young, fun days. And, the first time I was disfellowshipped at 19, I was only out of the organization for a couple of years. But the second time when I was divorced and then a single mom, I stayed out for a while. I stayed out probably for a good 10 years.
Oh,
And it was during that time, it was good. It was good because during that time, I put myself through school. I was like, this is my opportunity to go to school because all the Jehovah's Witnesses and all of my Jehovah's Witness family, they're out of my life. They can't interfere. I can do what I want. And the shunning was helpful because it kept all of them and all of their beliefs and all of their judgment and all of their martyrdom away from me, because they weren't allowed to talk to me. They did see my kids. They would watch my kids for me if I was busy with work or school. And for that, I'm very, is always very grateful. But it gave me the autonomy I needed. So I went to school. I got remarried, I made friends, I made a life for myself. I found out who I was, I discovered myself, all that exploration came later during my 30s.
yes.
When I was 40, I remarried, and that's when I went back to the organization mistakenly. My second husband said, "Why don't you go back? That way all your family can come to our wedding. And, then after we're married, you can just backslide," and I said, "It doesn't work that way. Once you're in the congregation, you're like under the control and scrutiny again." But I did go
And
back.
he wasn't part of your congregation.
No, he
Oh.
wasn't. And so, I was being judged anyway for marrying him because he wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. But I did go back because he asked me and he thought that would be good for like a family sense. But he just didn't understand. But anyway, so I was back in.
I'm sitting here thinking about adaptation, how we adapt to other people. And you were certainly trained to adapt, from the year you were 10.
Yeah.
And suddenly then there's this other person asking something
Yeah.
from you. And your inner seems to be telling you, no, I don't want to do that. And you still did it.
Yeah, and I still did it. I think part of it was that I wanted my family to get to know him and accept him, and and he wanted that too. So basically if I didn't go back, my family would be shunning him as well. It's not like they would have accepted him 100% because he wasn't a Jehovah's Witness, but they could have gotten to know him, and his kids, because he had 2 kids of his own, but it didn't work out in that kind of idyllic way. So, that was my 40s. My 40s was living my second marriage, being a stepmom, getting my doctorate, which was a problem now that I was back in the congregation. It was a problem that I was going back to school again. Yeah.
I'm thinking of courage and fear, because we talk about courage being, it's not like they're fearless people walking this planet, but courage is about knowing your fears, of daring to feel your fears and do what's best anyway,
Yeah.
which really sounds so easy, doesn't it? It's not, which it's not. What fears and defenses did you notice in yourself during this journey, and also in the people who wanted to keep you there?
My fear, especially looking back, it was hard to put my finger on it at the time, but um my fear was always letting my parents down, you know.
Yeah.
Probably because I was always labeled, even as a child, like I was the independent one. I had a mind of my own. I was the disrespectful one. I don't think I was disrespectful, but I would ask questions, I was the black sheep. I was the rebellious one. And I look back and I'm like, there was nothing rebellious or bad about me. I was a good student. I went to school. I didn't drink. I didn't do drugs. I didn't do any, but because I was a questioning Jehovah's Witness,
Yes.
I got all of these labels. And so I think I grew up with not a not a clear goal of pleasing my parents. It was more subconscious of just like can explain it more as like a feeling of dread of like
Yeah.
letting my parents down again or just not being good enough or not. And so there was always that dread of, oh my God, how do I stand up for myself? How do I do what I want to
Think the
do?
fear would be underneath that? I mean, it's like, yeah, we're dreading of making someone disappointed in us. Is that also about inclusion, exclusion? I won't be able to be part of it if you are not happy with me.
I don't think so. I didn't really have any of that. I mean, because I had been in a disfellowship state from the congregation and shunned from my family for so many years, as like most of my adult life,
Yeah.
from the time I was 19, most of I didn't really feel connected to my family anymore anyway. I didn't have those relationships were broken when I was a very young adult,
Yeah.
and they really never got repaired. And I love them, but it's like a it's like a blood love, it's like,
Yes.
those relationships were just kind of like broken and so much time was lost and it's just, they're just there.
But
As
it's
people
interesting that you still care about if they're going to be, I can't remember the words you said now, but if they're not going to be pleased with you.
I think it was more about they would make themselves the martyr and it was very unfair. But I knew that there was no conversation that I could have that would change that.
No.
And so it was very defeating. you could take a stand and leave the organization and okay, you'll be disfellowshipped and shunned or whatever. That's really hard for some people. For me, it was never. It was always liberating. And we can talk about that more if you want. But I think for me, it was more about realizing that I wasn't going to have a voice with them. There was going to be no conversation. They would see themselves as the victim of my decision. They would see themselves as the martyr. They would talk to me in a very guilt-tripping way. And it was like almost intolerable to have to listen to that.
Yes.
It was like sickening to listen to it because there would be no explanation or nothing that would wake them up to change that. And, even something as blunt, like I said before, of wait a minute, like you two always had autonomy to create your life your way, and this is what you made it. Why, as a grown adult, my kids are grown adults now. I mean, if I'm in my 40s, 50, my kids were grown adults. But I still don't have the autonomy to leave this religion and make a life of and when someone can't even hear that,
Yeah.
it's just dreadful. And I remember when I had to make the decision to finally leave, it was getting over that took the most time. That was the sticking point. That was
What was the pivotal point that made you make that move?
It's a good question. I think I relied on my profession to give me like the catalyst to make that decision. And what I mean is that by the time I finally left, I had done enough private and personal investigation into Jehovah's Witnesses as an organization and found a lot of disturbing things that as a social worker, I could not condone. Like they hide child sex abuse. And I mean, that's another whole like 2-week discussion, I want to say, and there's plenty of information out there that deals with that and proves that. It was the way that they hide child sex abuse and not deal with it that gave me the reason above all of this emotional mess. It gave me a clear reason and it disassociated me from the emotional mess to say, wait, whatever I'm feeling about this craziness, guilt, this, that, what I, as a social worker, cannot be part of an organization that looks the other way and hides child sex abuse and keeps offenders in their midst and protects offenders. And so that I just focused on that and just pulled the plug.
But that's so interesting. It sounds like you needed the logical mind as well. You had one
For
part.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was definitely stuck in emotional mind for a very long time, which, and again, it happens in like, intimate partner violence relationships or, domestic abuse. Like it's the head trip, that gets in your way and it becomes so much a part of who you are. It's not even just like, oh, I feel like a bad person for leaving. It's just embedded in that. But it's funny how it goes away. Hopefully for everybody, but it went away for me. It just like the skies cleared, the clouds went away, and it was like all of a sudden there was no more conflict at all.
We often need some supports to show us reality as it is.
For sure. And I think what helped me is by that time I had had enough years to make a support system of my own outside of the congregations. I had my second husband who was extremely supportive when I wanted to leave. I had made enough friends who were not Jehovah's Witnesses who knew, my whole life story and all of that. And when I told them I was leaving, they were extremely supportive. So I already had a life this time around.
Jackie, thank you. We'll wrap up this episode here. I'm really grateful for your openness in sharing your journey and experiences. Hearing your perspective and what happens in high control groups is truly fascinating. Thank you for giving us that insight. We'll be back in the next episode where we'll talk more about navigating situations when things feel confusing, high pressure, or even controlling, a challenge many leaders face.
Thank you, Margareta.
So where can our listeners reach you? if they'd like to. And is there something else you'd like to mention before we close?
They can reach out to my email address. And if they need something specifically from ICSA, then, I can guide them there. But I would love to hear from people. And if it's more about contacting with me, professionally, I'll just keep the conversation going, of course.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful. Thank you so
Mhm.
much for your contribution.
Yes. Yes. Thank you both.
You can find Jackie's contact information in the episode summary. Before we wrap up, think about this. What's one small courageous action you can take today? If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who might find it valuable. You can DM me on LinkedIn and Instagram at Margareta Kull, or visit our website at courageous-leader.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts and answer your questions in future episodes. That's it. Thank you for listening. Dare to make a difference. Before we wrap up, here is the legal bit. You know, the fine print I need to mention. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. I'm just your companion on this journey. I'm not a licensed therapist, and this podcast is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, psychotherapist, or other qualified professionals.